Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of the Portuguese-American Hour. We are a product of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. That's PBBI from California State University, Fresno. We are happy to be here with you. Another segment of the Portuguese-American Hour, our history segment, one of the most popular, I would say the most popular, that we do on a weekly basis. And we're very, very thankful to Dr. Monique Valance, who is a PhD in Portuguese history from the University of California. I'll never forget this ever in my life, Santa Barbara, because I made that mistake once. And so, Monique, welcome. And once again, as always, very grateful that you take time. I know it's busy at your business, that you take time for this segment.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I enjoy myself so much. I always try to make time for this.
Well, and we have lots of listeners and lots of people who watch it also now on Facebook Live, but our traditional listeners at KGST, Multicultural Radio, that I always get nice comments and appreciate your knowledge and how you present it. And so, what are we going to learn in Portuguese history today is my standby question.
Well, I thought we would go a little different. So I'm going to talk about Isabella of Portugal, who was the daughter of Dom Manuel I, and will eventually become the wife of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. And even though she doesn't spend most of her life in Portugal, I mean, she is still Portuguese, and she had a pretty significant impact on the Iberian Peninsula. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about her today.
Sure.
It's kind of an interesting story. You know, one day I want to become write like telenovelas and just make all these stories about all of these stories that I talk about with the kings and queens, because it's just, I mean, I could so picture this as a soap opera. I think it's more interesting than, the fiction
than some of the soap operas that we put together, huh?
Yeah. Right. So Isabella was the daughter of Manuel I, the fortunate king, and Maria of Aragon, who was the daughter of Isabel and Fernando. You know, our American textbooks call him Ferdinand. I always think of a bull when I think of the name Ferdinand, but it's, the Germanic Germanicization, I don't know if that's a word, of the name Fernando, but he would have answered to Fernando, so I always call him Fernando. The Catholic kings. And so she was born on October 23rd, 1503 in Lisbon. And being that she was the daughter of the fortunate king, she was a pretty attractive candidate for the marriage market. As we know, for noble women, and this wasn't true for all women in those days, but if you're especially a princess, your value is how your marriage, because a marriage is very important to the politics, the wealth of a country, and so whom she would marry could play a very important part. As we've seen, marriages can create a lot of good things for a country, or it can cause bad things. In Isabella's case, she's it seems like, when she's born, that she can pretty much have the pick of any princess, not maybe the pick, but she's looking at, they're looking to marry her pretty high. So definitely Dom Manuel is not going to settle for just any guy to marry his daughter. He's going to make sure it's going to be very advantageous. Now, her mother died when she was 13, so she died in 1517. And she and her sisters inherited her mother's estates. As we've talked about before with the Casas Rainhas, it was pretty common for the queen's lands to pass down to either their daughters or their daughters-in-law. So we kind of see the separation between the woman's land, the men's land. And unlike England and France and other countries, women in the Iberian Peninsula, women were always taken care of. So you don't see this thing where one son inherits everything and the daughters are left in the cold to fend for themselves, or, well, except Catherine of Aragon, but that's another story. I need to start another podcast, Tudor history. Anyway.
That's right.
So, now the Protestant Reformation happens in 1517, and this is going to split Europe down the line in as far as like religion goes. So now her choice of eligible suitors has dwindled a bit, because there's no way she's going to marry a Protestant prince or king or anything like that. But it's still a new movement, so it hasn't doesn't really get going as far as the higher circles go until more towards the end of the 16th century. But as for, everyone in Portugal anyway, the ideal candidate for her would be Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who's also Carlos I of Spain. He's like the most powerful monarch in all of Europe, because not only does he control the Holy Roman Empire, which was like Austria, the Netherlands, Bohemia, like pretty much all of Central Europe, and some of Northern Europe, but also, of course, we know Spain and the Spanish Empire. So the sun never sat on Carlos's empire. And he became king at a pretty young age. I mean, his mother was Juana la Loca, because, grandfather of the year locked her away in a tower. But he did inherit both Castile and Aragon from his grandparents. And what's really interesting is this, like we always talk about Spain, 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 but this is really when you start to see a Spain. Fernando was the king of Aragon, Isabel was the queen of Castile. You couldn't really call it Spain before. But now that both the bigger crowns have been united under Charles, now it's like we can start calling it Spain. As we know, it's Portugal's already been a country for a long time, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, and we'd like to remind everyone also that, yes, that when Spain began looking like a country, we had been a country for a few centuries. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I actually wrote my senior thesis on how it was all Spain's fault that Portugal lost its empire. And my professor wrote a bit nationalistic, but it's good. Okay. Definitely very militantly Portuguese here.
Yes.
So, and Carlos, other than that, he was only 3 years older than her, which was good. As we've seen, sometimes girls were forced to marry men much older than them. Yes, they were first cousins, so it's a little gross to us, but genetically it's not too bad. Could be worse. So it seems like a very attractive alliance for them. Also on Spain's side, it's good for them too. It kind of ends the feuding that they've been having over the explorations, the Americas and Asia. And then, of course, Spain was interested in keeping Portugal is under its like sphere of influence and not letting France kind of sneak in and try to like stab Spain in the back by getting Portugal as an ally. So overall, plus they got a lot of money and he needs money because he's involved in a lot of wars. Sure. So it seems like it's all going to work out. But Charles is not so ready to settle down, because I think Charles was thinking like, hey, I'm the most powerful guy in Europe. I got to take this for a spin, and I got to see what, I don't have to settle for the Portuguese princess. Yeah, she's my cousin, but I got a lot of cousins. So I got to, kind of see where do I think is going to be the most advantageous marriage to me. And so he actually settled on another cousin, Mary Tudor, the English princess and daughter of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII. This is before, of course, Henry gets divorced from Catherine and the whole big debacle. But he decided he was going to marry her, and the two actually get engaged in 1521, which really offended a lot of Portuguese people, because they're like, you would really go to her instead of our princess. But the problem with Mary is that she was 16 years younger than him. And so she's still a child, and he has a lot of waiting around for her to grow up. So, just to remind the listeners that even if a girl got engaged at the age of 5, she's not going to get married at 5. It's on paper, but the actual, physical part of being married doesn't happen until you hit puberty, at least 13, 14. So he's got a lot of waiting to do. And I think at first he thought, oh, I'm a man, I can have kids as long as I want. But after 4 or 5 years, he got kind of tired of waiting around, and he realized, like, maybe this isn't such a good idea. So he breaks things off with Mary, and in 1525, he, decides to marry Isabella instead. He settles for her. Of course, it helps that she has 900,000 cruzades to bring him, which is a lot of money, and probably a lot more than Mary was going to bring him, because England doesn't have as much money as Portugal does. And, it's all the advantages that we talked about. It just really made the most sense was to marry her. Now, what's interesting is that, as much as Charles resisted marrying her, and maybe that's because like everybody expected him to marry her, and he wanted to remind everybody like, hey, I'm the king. He fell madly in love with her. So they got married, and, they honeymooned for months, which was pretty unusual. So he fell head over heels for her, and pretty much was, just totally devastatingly in love with her for his whole life. It's really interesting. Now, of course, he also sends his sister to go marry Jean the Third, Catherine of Austria. So just a little bit more, what do we call that? Inbreeding.
Right, right, right.
It's not Appalachia. This is like, the kings of Portugal, and just to kind of get that inbreeding in there a little bit more. Not quite, the Habsburgs are notorious for this inbreeding, and that's why Habsburgs were famous for like the Habsburg chin. They, like, by the 1700s, you get the Habsburgs, which Charles was a Habsburg, with this like prominent, like just really kind of big chin. That was, they realized that marrying family members and keeping everything all in the family was spelled a lot of success and wealth for the family and for
Hmm.
these crowns, but genetically was horrible, because of course by late 1600s we start to see a lot of like the Spanish kings, especially, and some in Austria, who are just like not healthy and not mentally well, and a lot of it's probably due to all of this inbreeding. Now, what's interesting is Isabella actually, even though they were madly in love, Charles has this humongous empire that he's got to take care of. And in the 1500s, you can't Zoom. We can't have a Zoom meeting with all my ambassadors and talk to everybody in the Netherlands, or go over here to Hungary, or go to Vienna. He actually has to physically be there. And of course, we don't have a Learjet, we don't have the Concorde. So there's a lot of traveling involved in such a vast empire. And so Isabella actually spent a lot of time in Spain alone, waiting for Charles to come home. She still managed to get pregnant 7 times. So it's not like he totally left her forever. But she was actually left to govern Spain. Every time he was out, he left her in charge, and actually showed a lot of influence. I mean, they really credit her with keeping Spain sort of independent, and keeping Spain more autonomous within this whole humongous Holy Roman Empire, and not getting kind of absorbed by Austria. So that's really kind of to her credit, as well as the economy. I mean, after she dies, Spain sees a huge amount of inflation. So really, I mean, she was a very astute ruler and pretty much de facto ruler of Spain for a lot of the time. So it was pretty great. Now, one thing else that's kind of interesting is that while they were honeymooning to back up a little bit, they were honeymooning in Granada at the Alhambra, and Charles ordered these seeds of a Persian flower to be brought, and it bloomed into this red carnation. And she was so enchanted with these red carnations that he ordered thousands of them to come and have them planted everywhere. And now the red carnation is one of the symbols of Spain. So let's do the Portuguese princess. But
But we got it back from them with the revolution in 1974.
Right. Exactly.
We brought back those carnations.
That's true, right?
Took a while, but we brought them back.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Let me ask you one quick question. When you were saying
Sure.
that she was kind of the manager and de facto of the kingdom, because he was away so much. So, is this really part of the do historians and historians in the college level, obviously, but do high school students, or that have even get a chance to know this? Because it seems like it's women in a lot of times in history books, especially at this time, when we're talking about the 1500s, 1600s, anywhere, even before and quite a bit after, women are not seen as these rulers, or even, I mean, even when they have a page in the history book, a couple of our queens, from Portugal, that were actually queens, in the aspect that they, Dona Maria and everything else, when they, in the traditional history books, they, when some of the kings may have, and some of them deservedly so, may have 5 or 6 pages because of their role. When it comes to some of the ladies, they may have a page and a half, and do you feel that Isabella gets some of this credit in the history world, in today's history world? No.
Nope. I mean, because first of all, I to me, I think high school history is a travesty in a lot of ways. It's not the fault of the teachers at all. I think the teachers do an excellent job working with what they have. But when I've actually worked with some kids who did like AP European history or AP world history, and it just seems like either this gets they like I mean they don't even know who Henry the Navigator is, and so when they do talk about Charles V, very rarely, I don't think they've ever mentioned his wife. I mean, just he gets all the credit. Like he's Charles V, and then he has a son Philip II, and they're very important men. And it wasn't until I went to college, actually, really until I went to grad school, and this is actually still a field of history that's still relatively new in a lot of ways, especially in Iberian history. But the role of the Queen Consort, I don't think anybody really focused on how important a role that is. Like, yeah, she's not technically the monarch in name, but the Queen Consort is like, and I discovered this when I did my dissertation, is like how powerful and how important a position that is, because you're talking about the woman who educated the future king, and his and the siblings who could also come to the throne. Usually the person who a lot of times would be the regent while the king is out of the country, is the regent after the king dies. And this was an extension of this womanly like role, that like what was seen as like the woman's duty to take care of her family, right, take care of her children, and kind of take care of the country while waiting for the son to become old enough to be king. And so this could like sometimes can make or break a kingdom, and it is extremely important. But yet, like you said, it gets glossed over, or never, hardly, very rarely mentioned. I mean, unless they do something really bad, then of course
Right. Yeah.
everybody knows about it.
Correct. Yeah. If
And
they had,
it's
yeah.
probably why Elizabeth never got married. I mean, and Elizabeth II, even, she never even let her husband be king. Right? He was the Duke of Edinburgh, because otherwise you get overshadowed.
Sure. Indeed. Okay. Isabella did went to a different world outside of Portugal, but had an influence probably in Portugal itself, because of her role with Charles, with and of course because of the role of Spain at that particular time. Do you think it did help, kind of the peace between the two countries?
I think it did. I think definitely helped the diplomacy at the time. The unfortunate consequence of this marriage is that it directly was one of the direct factors leading to Spain taking over Portugal in 1580, I'm sorry, because her son is Philip II of Spain. And so that was one of the reasons that Philip was able to claim the throne when Sebastian dies.
Correct.
Is because, hey, my mother's Portuguese,
right,
and I'm in line to the throne. He didn't have the strongest claim, but he had the strongest army and the most money. So that helps a lot. But yeah, if it wasn't for this marriage,
right, and exactly those three things that you said. I mean, he had army, he had money, and it wasn't the strongest claim, but he did have a claim. It was a claim.
Right.
It was
legitimate.
It was enough to get there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and he had a relationship with Sebastian. So I read this biography where this guy Henry came in. He just loves Philip so much, and he was like, oh, when he heard that Sebastian died, he cried. And I was like, yeah, he cried tears of joy, crocodile tears.
Not for too long. He was
yeah, right. Yeah, he was crying all the way to the bank.
He cried so much he said, I'm just going to annex that country.
Right? Jump on my horse and go all the way to Lisbon.
I feel so bad for him that I want to take over.
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, and then Isabella dies in 1539. She was 35, and she or 34 rather, and she died after the birth of her seventh child. The baby came prematurely, and then she died 2 weeks later. She had been kind of sickly. They talked about how the queen was really like thin, and she didn't look well. She some people thought she had consumption, but so apparently when she died, Charles was so devastated he couldn't even bring himself to accompany her body to its resting place. He wore black the rest of his life. He never remarried. And, he is eventually going to retire and leave half of his kingdom or half of his ruling lands to his son and the other half to his brother Maximilian. So it's just really, I mean, for somebody like that, you don't ever see that. That's like when, the Pope retired. We were kind of like, what? That doesn't, are you allowed to do that? And Charles retired and said, hey, I give it up, So it's really, it really seems like they had this passionate love affair, and that he really, really loved her. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. That is it's one good thing. That's one good thing that came out of Spain. Then, you know,
Yeah.
and I should explain to our listeners and our viewers that in Portuguese, in mainland Portugal especially, we have this saying: "De Espanha nem bons ventos, nem bons casamentos," because literally from Spain, there's not such thing as a good wind because a lot of our wind comes from the Atlantic, of course, as we know, and no good marriages. And because the
Right.
words ventus and casamentos, of course, there's they rhyme there, so that's why it's used. So no good marriage or no good win from Spain. That's a Portuguese
Yeah.
saying from.
Right.
But in this case, there was some good to the
Yeah.
to the
They got
marriage,
lucky.
at least that they loved each other. That's already a very big thing that didn't happen in every single monarchy in the
No, and that wasn't
European
the
continent.
purpose for right. And when you were noble, that was not the purpose of marriage. I always say, love is for poor people,
That's right.
like,
That's right. Well, Monique, thank you so much. Appreciate it. That was Dr. Monique Kelly Valance, a PhD in Portuguese history from the University of California in Santa Barbara. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so
okay, see you
much.
next time.
Appreciate it. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.